guest joining us in studio this morning. We see him quite frequently on Wednesday mornings. He's part of the rotation, but he's really the star of the show. Dr. Jonathan Tripp from Tripp Family Medicine, right here in Twin Falls, located on Fillmore Street. And
Pretty
we,
rare that I've been called
hold on just for a moment. Let me make sure that's up. He said pretty rare.
say pretty rare that I've been called the star of the show. This is fun, but I don't know if
See,
I've not made it to star status.
that's because you didn't bring the office manager in with you today.
Yeah, that is true. That would be the star of the show.
Yes.
She's also my wife, so she's definitely the star of the show. So that's she should be on this show more often. She's somebody that's been a little fearful of being in the public eye, but
She did a good job the
yeah,
one day she was here.
yeah. You and I were talking off the air about Senator Barrasso, who's a orthopedic surgeon I actually trained under in my residency, and like John Barrasso being a very smart guy, uh, my wife with a math degree just is smarter than she knows, and very intelligent about political issues. And I keep telling her she should run for president, but she'd probably be more direct than Donald Trump.
But who would run the office?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I don't allow her to even go for local office. That's right.
We're
So
talking rashes and itching today, and
yeah,
we're getting into that time of year, especially.
we got an itchy subject, and
Yeah,
this is
very
this
good.
is one that affects you know from babies to our soon to be ancestors. So people that of all ages. And what's interesting is rashes come from all kinds of different directions, and so people often associate a rash with something they've come into contact with, or maybe a virus that they've had. But we're going to talk about how there's quite a few different directions this can come from, and depending on what the rash is and how long it lasts, may be very minor or might be a big warning sign that something big is going on. So,
I haven't had I know people who've had to deal with because they stepped in poison ivy or they're allergic to something else and that the product they're using. But I don't think I've had any issues with rashes since I was playing sports in high school. And then I used to, get them around my armpits and other places where I would be sweating a lot. And I would just get very red and sore sometimes for days on end.
and
Uh,
how did you fix that?
Tried to stay dry.
Try to stay dry. Yep. No, in fact, that's one of the areas we're going to talk about. You're giving an example of a fungal infection. It's not bacterial. It's not just you rubbed your underarms raw. It is actually fungus, or what we talk about yeast infections, like moist, warm, and dark.
Mhm.
And so that's all the creases of our bodies, and sometimes it even takes a hold with what people think about ringworm on very open surfaces. And they say, "Where did I get this from?" And the real answer is it's pretty pervasive. It's usually always on your skin. Like bacteria, there's always bacteria on your skin even after washing. But the question is, does your skin is it intact? Does it have good integrity? And, at least in theory, these things get started because of some irritation, maybe caused by mechanical motion or a scratch. And often that is the precipitating event, what gets it started. And then the question is, how do we get rid of it? And sometimes it's as simple as get it dry and get it to light exposure, and the body kind of takes care of itself. But if that doesn't work, then we turn to some medicines. Often those are really basic and simple things, like even over the counter antifungal, like athlete's foot creams.
I know that I had an aunt who was an RN, and she would often, in that day and age, calamine lotion was often applied, and I don't know how successful that was. I did have a rash one time caused by my glasses, and she recommended a cortisone cream, which worked wonders at the time and cleared that up. That's 30 some years ago, but we've made great advances in treating a lot of these things, I'm sure.
Well, a lot of it's identifying the cause. So let me talk about some of those. But cortisone cream, especially the over the counter version, is very mild. It can be used for several days or a week at a time without very much danger, and often helps all kinds of things because it suppresses swelling. It doesn't really care why. It doesn't care if it's infectious or if it's, swelling because you came into contact with something, or kind of like metals. Some people will get a rash to what we call base metals like nickel, even belt buckles. People will say, how come I'm getting this rash just below my belly button? And it turns out that the button on their pants, or the metal button, or the belt buckle itself is the cause, is the irritant. So let me talk about those. We have rashes from irritants. We'll have rashes that come from uh, problems with blood vessels. We have infections, and that, the ones I'll talk about are bacterial, viral, and fungal, which we've kind of already touched on. And then I want to talk about, children or babies versus adults, and short term versus long term. If you get a rash, does it come and go in a couple of days, or is it persisting and hanging on? Because that's a big warning sign if it hangs around.
Sometimes we have to be concerned that it might be something far more nefarious than the rash. We've got to take a short break. We'll get
Okay.
back to that and more of the discussion coming up in a few minutes. Dr. Jonathan Tripp is in the studio with us. It's Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine on News Radio 1310 KLIX this morning at newsradio1310.com. 45 at 8:40. Got about 20 more minutes. Hope you can stick around.
That's a good one. Allergic.
There we go. Dr. Tripp and I are just having an off-air discussion about unusual things that will trigger an allergic reaction. Dr. Jonathan Tripp, of course, from Tripp Family Medicine right here in Twin Falls, located on Fillmore Street and directly across from the main post office. Joins us on Wednesday mornings between 8:30 and 9 o'clock on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com with Bill Colley. Very quickly, since we haven't brought it up yet, if people want to get in touch with the office, how do they go about doing that?
Sure. Let me give you the phone number first. It's 208 933 4400. That's 933 4400. And then obviously you can get a hold of us through our webpage, which is trippfamilymedicine.com. You can even, ask to schedule an appointment that way through an email, but also on Facebook, we're at Tripp Family Medicine. So, and that's been a lot of fun because we've had a lot of nice testimonials or posts that are, beautifully spontaneous. Some that come from unexpected sources. Somebody I think, we really had a tough time in our office with, and yet they'll put a nice posting saying what a great job we did, and it's sometimes a real surprise who those come from. So,
Well, we wanted to
it's kind
talk
of
a little
fun.
bit about infants,
Yeah.
and because especially when you've got a baby, and if it's the first time you've had a child and you sometimes see something, it's very worrisome.
Let me give you a perfect example of that this week. So I'll just draw on things that I've done this week. I have a nice, not a new mom though. Usually this is a new mom, but a lady who has about a 6 or 7 year old daughter and then has a baby boy that's now 5 weeks. Came into the office because he has a rash all over. It partly was on the front of the scalp, but mainly on both sides of the cheeks. Pretty red and irritated, and little bumps, a little bit scaly, even what looks like some little pimples on it. And so she was sure that, he had some serious infection and had tried quite a few over the counter topicals, and, it really wasn't getting a whole lot better. And it turned out to be very common. We just call it baby acne or infantile acne. And it usually lasts anywhere between about 2 and 5 months. And the main treatment is moisturize, and you are really not curing. You're just keeping the skin as uninflamed as you can while the child goes through that.
Mostly, it's on the bottom, right?
No, no, this one's cheeks right on the face, and it looks like a mean case of acne. It's just everything is kind of red, a little scaly, and has these little white heads. And you would think the child would be miserable because of how it looks, but they really don't hardly pay any attention to it. But you got to think there's some itchiness at least to it. But a 5 week old can't tell you too much.
Diaper rash, of course, is still the one that most people are familiar with.
Diaper rash, it really is two main varieties. The contact dermatitis of the diaper actually rubbing on the skin, and that's usually because you got a wet diaper, soiled diaper that already is setting the skin up for irritation, but the diaper itself rubs on the bottom, and that rash you won't see in the creases like between the in the front of the legs, but there's another rash that usually starts in the creases, and that's a totally different deal. That's the fungal rash, and that can be caused by one of several fungi. But Candida is one, so a lot of people talk about Candida in the mouth or vaginal, and so that's thrush or a vaginal yeast infection. It's the same stuff on the outside in the creases. It says, hey, this is fungal. And going back to your story, probably the easiest treatment is take the diaper off, let them get dry, give them 10 or 15 minutes every once in a while and see if that'll go away. And often it goes away in a day or two. If not, then we turn to some antifungal creams, and that's very benign.
And of course, when you have a baby around, you've constantly got to deal with the fact that they're moving their hands around, putting them in their mouths, and so there's a lot of transference of some of these things.
Yep, they're making sure that their immune system gets built up pretty good. I'm just going to throw that in. There was a study done in Denmark about 3 years ago, and they did results of people that kids that had pacifiers, and the study was broken down between parents that never would lick the pacifier and clean it off and put it back in the kid's mouth, and the ones that the parents routinely would lick it off or clean it off that way and stick it back in the kid's mouth. And the incidence of allergies in the kids that the parents licked off the pacifier was much lower than it was in the kids that never had that, saliva to saliva communication. So sometimes a little exposure is good.
That's because we're so try to keep things so clean anymore. Sometimes we don't get exposed to those. It's like having animals in the house. The kids get exposed to a little dirt and things like that.
Yep. No, that's, I personally have learned to be a little bit of a germaphobe. I'm really good about washing my hands. I'm not afraid to touch people, but as soon as I go from checking out somebody's rash, I go right to the sink. There's no way I want to carry that around with me. So I appreciate those that are a little paranoid about germs and bacteria and whatnot that can cause trouble. But it is true, our immune system is built to identify and handle. And as a kid, you go through more illness, hopefully non-life threatening illness, but that's part of building that immune system.
Now, because of your background working with people and their skin, you obviously realize what can happen after they've gone through a disease where they get the measles or the chicken pox. And we were talking off air about scarring and things like that can happen. Generally, though, I mean, I think if you have a baby and no one's picking at any of those things are going to be okay.
Most of the time. And the problem is you need it to heal because the longer something stays open, the more chance of getting what's called a secondary infection. So now you got a skin infection on top of whatever the virus caused the lesion, like the chickenpox lesion. In fact, let me talk about hand, foot, and mouth. That's a big one. Everybody gets hand, foot, and mouth, and they get it usually multiple times in their life. And at first is usually its worst. So if you have a kiddo that's 6 months old, they'll get blisters on the palms of their hands, on the soles of their feet, around their mouth, and on the roof of their mouth, the soft palate, and they have trouble swallowing because it hurts so much. So the big deal with that one isn't that the rash kills you; it's that the child won't take in fluids adequately, and so that becomes kind of a life-threatening if the child's really not taking in fluids. You need to do that by IV or, it's funny we don't think of this much, but you can actually give fluid via an enema that the colon absorbs the water that way as well. So that's a little bit graphic for some of the listeners, but there's more than one way to get fluid in a kiddo, but it is that's often the threat of childhood diseases isn't the actual disease because they'll get through that. It's the dehydration because you can go without food for several days, but water that's not such a good one. So hand, foot, and mouth is one that's scary, but as it progresses, in age, and you get it the second, third, and fourth time, it gets to where there's no rash, there's no fever. There's really no symptom other than maybe some drainage, runny nose, maybe scratchy throat. And you can't tell any difference between that and any other common cold virus. So as adults, we may have that virus, have a little bit of a cold, pass it on to a kiddo that's never had hand, foot, and mouth, and we don't even know that that's what we gave them.
Hmm.
So, a lot of our things, we don't have an immunization for hand, foot, and mouth, but a lot of our childhood diseases, adults can still carry and pass on. So, uh, things like whooping cough. That's made a big comeback over the last 10 years. It was unheard of when I started my practice about 15 years ago. And the area that I went to in South Texas, we had an outbreak of 5 cases, which was horrendously high in a population of about 20,000. And all of a sudden, that was considered a local epidemic and quickly became astute at how we treat that, and what to look for. But in my training, it was a has been past disease that almost nobody had, and now it's very common, especially in the Northwest where we have a lot of people that say, hey, immunizations are bad and I don't want my kids to have that. I understand those arguments, but I've also had the opportunity to have a kid die in my arms, and once you have that happen, immunizations become a lot less threatening.
We've got 8:52 and Dr. Jonathan Tripp in studio with us. Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine. Bill Colley as well on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. I had a problem about 5 or 6 years ago where I had constant. The doctor thought it was eczema, worse on my right hand than on my left, but on both hands. And I was trying all sorts of different creams, and nothing seemed to work. And then I moved from one house to another, and it all went away. So it was
Wow.
obviously something environmental from the one building compared to the other.
Yeah, that sure sounds like it. A lot of times people will get a condition that has little blisters along with the intense itching and redness that's called dyshydrotic eczema. And this is one that flares with stress and then goes away when you're not stressed. And it kind of comes and goes. And so you'll try all kinds of creams for it, and it doesn't much work because the cause is the stress, not the skin condition. And so with your building move, it may have been environmental, but there's a lot of things we get on the hands or elsewhere that can be fungus that you try an antifungal, the person will say, you know what, I used it for 3 days and it didn't work. Well, that's part of the experience of knowing what to use and when to. And that's why, a medical provider will help because antifungals generally take weeks, 2 to 3 weeks for it to really work. So it's hard to know if it's helping for a week or so.
We have a caller with us. You're on the air with Dr. Jonathan Tripp at 8:54.
Hey, sorry, this is off the subject a little bit, but I've got a finger on my right hand. I'm 61, and in December it started getting cold, and every time you go out now, it's just cold, just that one finger. Is it just bad circulation, or?
Is it just when you go out into the cold that it gets cold?
Yes,
Okay.
but like today, it's cold, but the temperature outside is not cold.
But your finger is.
The finger is, yes.
Okay. This does sound like more of a vascular problem because it's one specific finger. And so not knowing your background, but if you have some diabetes or other, heart disease or what's called peripheral vascular disease, that's a real hint that probably some things need to be looked at upstream.
Yeah, I just had a stress test. My heart's fine, and I don't have diabetes, but it's kind of strange. So.
Yeah, no, in fact, but when you started out the conversation, you said you had a finger on your right hand, and I was thinking, well, I'm glad you have a finger. So
I'm glad I do too.
no, that's one that probably needs a little further investigation, especially if it starts turning blue on you.
All right, thanks.
Sure thing.
Want to thank him for the telephone call as well. And we've got a couple of minutes to go, and I know there's a couple of things you wanted to wrap up on as well.
Well, we just have a lot of fun with this. The kids, we talked about diaper rash, we talked about the baby acne, common colds, especially in children, will often have a fever, and then as the fever goes away after a first day or two, a rash will show up, and that's usually the alarm to the parent that, oh my goodness, this is something worse, or they got a second thing. But if that rash starts about day 2 of the cold, give it about 2 more days, and it'll probably go away. The caveat to that is a strep rash or what's called scarlatina. Kid will get a sore throat, may even have white on the tonsils, but they'll get a rash usually starting right at the base of the neck and the chest, and it feels like sandpaper. That's strep. That needs antibiotic treatment. But a lot of times, kids after they get this cold going, they'll have a rash all over their abdomen, even on their upper arms, upper legs, and it's not terribly itchy, but it looks terrible. So those are the kinds of things that I'm happy to see at our office. All the providers there are very astute at being able to distinguish these, whether it's threatening or not. But you can also get a rash with mononucleosis, which is viral. Looks like strep throat when you look at the tonsils. But if the provider doesn't test for mono, they give them the typical antibiotic for strep throat is amoxicillin. And amoxicillin with the monovirus will give you a rash. And it's not because you're allergic to the amoxicillin, but it's diagnostic of, oh, you have mono, you don't have strep throat.
It was the worst, I think, sore throat of my life having mononucleosis. And then within a few days, it did pass, but I had to spend a week in my college infirmary
Yep.
because they wanted to isolate me from everyone else.
You're lucky they only kept you a week because mono often lasts 2 to 6 weeks. So I have a personal story about that I got away with murder with a young lady I was dating in college who got mono. But we don't need to go into that
We'll
today.
say that for another day.
That's right.
We've got to wrap up quickly. Can you recap your contact information?
You betcha. Our phone number is 208 933 4400. And our Facebook page is Tripp Family Medicine. And our website is trippfamilymedicine.com. Absolutely, we're taking new patients. We take babies and everybody up from them.
Want to thank the doctor for coming by today. 9 o'clock news is just ahead. Also, in the next hour, we're going to share with you the story. Governor Otter has vetoed a bill that would have given the Bible a prominent place in Idaho schools. We'll tell you why that happened coming up in the next hour.